The colony transport shuddered violently as reality tore itself apart around the hull. Owen gripped his seat restraints while alarms screamed through every speaker in the passenger bay. Red emergency lights painted everything in shades of blood and shadow. Through the viewport, he watched stars stretch into impossible lines before snapping back like broken rubber bands. Something had gone catastrophically wrong with the jump drive. Other passengers screamed or prayed to whatever gods their species worshipped. Owen just watched the universe come apart at the seams and felt strangely calm. Maybe shock did that to people. Maybe he was already dead and his brain just hadn't caught up yet. The transport lurched sideways, throwing him against the restraints hard enough to bruise. Metal groaned somewhere deep in the ship's guts. Then everything went silent. Not the good kind of silent. The kind of silent that meant life support had failed. The kind that meant the ship was dying. Owen's ears popped as pressure changed. His breath fogged in front of his face as temperature dropped. Through the chaos, a mechanical voice spoke with artificial calm. Critical failure detected. All passengers proceed to emergency pods. This is not a drill. Owen unbuckled and pushed himself toward the pod bay. Other passengers struggled in the same direction, moving through corridors that tilted at wrong angles. The ship was spinning. He grabbed handholds and pulled himself along, ignoring the burn in his arms. Behind him, something exploded. The blast wave threw him forward into the pod bay. Only 3 pods remained. 20 passengers were still alive. The math was cruel and simple. Owen didn't think. He dove into the nearest pod and slammed his fist on the seal button. The door hissed shut, cutting off the sounds of panic and desperation. Through the small window, he saw other faces pressed against the remaining pods. Some made it, some didn't. The pod shook as explosive bolts fired, severing connections to the dying ship. Then he was falling through space in a coffin-sized metal box. The pod's computer came online, running diagnostics and calculating trajectories. Owen watched the small screen display information he didn't want to see. His pod was damaged. Guidance systems were failing. He was off course. Way off course. The screen flickered and showed a planet, massive and green and wrapped in clouds that looked almost white. Warning symbols covered every surface of the display. Red text scrolled past faster than he could read. He caught fragments. Class-9 designation. Extreme hazard. No landing permitted. Multiple failed expeditions. Probability of survival measured in hours, not days. Owen wanted to laugh, but nothing came out. He'd survived a ship catastrophe only to crash on a planet that killed everything that touched it. The pod shook harder as it hit atmosphere. Heat built up around the hull. Through the window, he watched his pod burn through clouds thick as soup. The computer kept screaming warnings. The descent was too fast. Angle was wrong. Impact would be severe. He had maybe 30 seconds to live. The pod smashed through a canopy of trees that looked like they were made of twisted metal. Branches scraped against the hull like claws. Owen's head snapped forward, then back. His vision went gray at the edges. The world spun. Something massive loomed ahead through the window. A rock formation jutting up from the ground like a broken tooth. The pod clipped it and went into a violent roll. When Owen woke up, everything hurt. His head throbbed. His ribs felt cracked. Blood ran down from somewhere above his left eye. The pod lay on its side, half buried in dirt that looked more like ash than soil. The window showed only darkness. He tried to move and gasped at the pain. Broken rib, definitely. Maybe 2, the computer was dead. No power, no readouts. No friendly mechanical voice telling him what to do next. Owen fumbled with the emergency release. It took 3 tries before the door hissed open. He crawled out onto ground that felt wrong under his hands. Too soft, too warm. Rain started falling. Owen looked up and immediately regretted it. Drops hit his face and burned like acid. Not strong enough to dissolve skin, but enough to hurt. Enough to warn him. He scrambled back into the pod and wiped his face with his sleeve. Through the open door, he watched the rain fall harder. It hissed where it hit the ground. Small plants withered and died under the assault. This was Designation 7. A Class-9 Deathworld. The kind of place the Galactic Federation marked with warning beacons and forbidden landing zones. The kind of place where survey teams went missing and rescue missions found only bones. Owen pulled himself deeper into the damaged pod and took stock. His emergency pack had survived. Inside, he found protein rations for maybe 2 weeks if he stretched them. A water recycler that might still work. One plasma cutter with half a charge, a basic medical kit, some tools, not much but more than nothing. The pod's distress beacon blinked weakly in the corner, damaged but functional. It would broadcast his location to any ship that came within range. That could be days, could be weeks, could be never. The last expedition to this planet had been 40 years ago. They'd lost 12 people before evacuating. Nobody came back to Deathworlds. Rain hammered against the hull. Owen patched the cut above his eye and wrapped his ribs as best he could. Pain made everything difficult. Moving hurt, breathing hurt. But staying in the pod would mean slow death. The rain proved this place was hostile to life, which meant he needed shelter. Real shelter. The kind that would last. He remembered seeing caves during the descent right before impact. Rock formations dotting the landscape like monuments to something ancient and dead. If he could reach them before dark, he might survive the night. Might. The word felt flimsy and pathetic. Owen waited for the rain to stop. It took hours. When the drops finally slowed to nothing, he gathered what he could carry and stepped outside. The air smelled like metal and rot. Everything was the wrong color. The plants were too dark, almost black with thorns like needles. The ground crunched under his boots. In the distance, something howled. Not like a wolf. Worse than a wolf. The sound carried intelligence and hunger in equal measure. He started walking toward the caves he remembered. Every step sent pain through his ribs. His head swam, but he kept moving because stopping meant dying. The landscape looked alien and hostile. Nothing was soft or gentle. Everything had edges meant for cutting or points meant for stabbing. Evolution had made this world into a weapon. The caves appeared as the sun started setting. 2 suns, actually. Both smaller than Earth's sun, but together they made the heat oppressive. The cave entrance yawned like a mouth in the hillside. Dark and deep and possibly full of things that would kill him. But the alternative was staying outside where bigger things would definitely kill him. Owen entered the cave with the plasma cutter in one hand and a light in the other. The walls were rough but dry. No rain reached here, no wind. The temperature was cooler, almost comfortable. He moved deeper, checking each shadow, ready for anything. That's when he saw the bones. They were scattered across the cave floor like dice thrown by careless gods. Some were massive, belonging to creatures he couldn't identify. Others were smaller. A few looked almost human. Pieces of corroded equipment lay among them. A helmet with a cracked faceplate. Part of a weapon frame. Scraps of fabric eaten away by time and moisture. Previous expeditions. People who'd tried to survive here and failed. Owen swallowed hard and kept walking. He found a chamber deeper in the cave system where the ceiling rose high and the floor was relatively flat. No bones here. No equipment. Just empty stone. It would work. It had to work. He set down his pack and immediately regretted it. The movement pulled at his ribs and he gasped. But there was no time for pain. He needed to secure the entrance. Needed to make this space defensible. Needed to think past the next hour and plan for the next day. A sound echoed from somewhere deeper in the cave. A scraping sound, like claws on stone. Owen grabbed the plasma cutter and pointed it toward the darkness. His hand shook. The sound came again, closer this time. Something was in here with him. Something big based on the heaviness of its movement. 2 eyes appeared in the darkness. They reflected his light like mirrors, glowing pale yellow in the gloom. The creature moved forward and Owen's breath caught. It was massive. 12 feet long at least, built low to the ground with legs like tree trunks. Its hide looked like stone plates, overlapping and scarred. A reptilian head swung toward him, jaws that could bite him in half. The creature stared at him. Owen stared back. Neither moved. The moment stretched into eternity. His finger rested on the plasma cutter trigger. One shot might wound it, might make it angrier, might do nothing at all against that armored hide. The creature took a step forward. Owen took a step back. His heel hit a loose rock and he stumbled. The creature's head tilted, watching him with what might have been curiosity, or hunger. Hard to tell with alien predators. Owen made a decision. He aimed the plasma cutter at the ceiling above the passage connecting the chambers. He fired. The beam cut through stone like butter. Rock crashed down, sealing the passage. The creature roared from the other side, frustrated but blocked, for now. Owen slid down the wall and sat on the cold stone floor. His ribs screamed. His head pounded. He was trapped on a death world in a cave with at least one massive predator, and supplies that wouldn't last a month. The distress beacon was broadcasting to empty space. No rescue was coming. He laughed then. Couldn't help it. The sound echoed off the walls, harsh and slightly mad. But somewhere in that laugh, Owen found something else. Determination, maybe. Or stubbornness. Or just the simple human refusal to die quietly. If he was stuck here, he'd survive. Not by waiting for rescue, but by learning to live in this nightmare. He'd build shelter. Find food, adapt, that's what humans did. They adapted. They survived. They made homes in places that should kill them. Owen closed his eyes and listened to the creature on the other side of the collapsed passage. It scraped at the rocks for a while before giving up and moving away. Silence returned to the cave. In that silence, Owen began to plan. Not for rescue, for living. Tomorrow he'd start building. Tonight he'd rest and heal. And in the morning he'd see if a Class-9 Deathworld could really kill someone who refused to die. 3 weeks changed everything about how Owen saw the world. Hunger taught him which fungi growing in the deep caves were safe to eat, and which would kill him in minutes. The medical scanner helped, beeping green for edible and red for poison. But eventually he learned to identify them by sight and smell. The pale ones with gills like fish fins were nutritious. The dark ones that smelled like copper meant death. Pain taught him to move carefully through his new home. The cracked ribs healed slowly, making every movement deliberate. He couldn't afford another injury. Not here, not alone. So he learned patience, which was funny because patience had never been his strength before the crash. Before this planet that turned every mistake into a potential death sentence. The cave system became familiar territory. He'd mapped 12 chambers connected by narrow passages, each with its own characteristics. Some were dry and warm, perfect for sleeping. Others had water seeping through cracks in the stone, which he collected in containers made from the pod's hull panels. One chamber had a natural chimney in the ceiling where smoke could escape, making it ideal for fires. That armored creature he'd blocked off on the first day never returned. Owen named it Granite in his head because the name helped make it less terrifying. Just giving something a name made it feel less like certain death and more like a problem he could solve. Maybe. Eventually. He'd ventured outside the cave exactly 7 times in 3 weeks. Each trip was calculated and brief. The planet's surface remained hostile in ways that defied easy description. Plants that looked soft were actually covered in microscopic barbs that worked their way under skin. Water that looked clear was often acidic enough to burn through fabric. The air itself carried spores that made him cough for hours until his body adapted. But the surface also held resources. Metal ore, for one thing. Owen had noticed it on his 3rd expedition, glittering in exposed rock faces near his cave. He'd chipped samples loose with the plasma cutter and brought them back for examination. The scanner confirmed what he'd hoped. Iron mostly, some copper, trace amounts of other useful metals. That's when the idea started forming. Not just survival, building, creating. Making this place into something more than a death trap. Owen spread his salvaged materials across the cave floor and took inventory. Parts from the pod, mostly useless for their original purpose but valuable as raw materials. The plasma cutter, down to a quarter charge now, precious and irreplaceable. His tools basic but functional. Protein rations down to 9 days' worth. Not enough. Never enough. He needed to hunt. The smaller creatures that lived in the cave system were his first targets. Things about the size of rats, but with too many legs and mandibles that clicked when they moved. They were fast and vicious, but they were also meat. Owen fashioned a spear from a metal support rod and a sharpened piece of hull plating. The first few hunts were disasters. He missed more than he hit. His ribs protested every throw. But hunger made him persistent. On the 8th attempt, he got one. The spear punched through its shell and pinned it to the cave wall. The creature thrashed for a few seconds, then went still. Owen approached carefully, ready for it to suddenly revive and attack. It didn't. He pulled the spear free and carried his prize back to the main chamber. Cooking it over a small fire filled the cave with a smell that wasn't exactly pleasant, but wasn't terrible either. The meat was tough and tasted like mushrooms mixed with fish, but it was protein. Real protein. Not the artificial stuff from the rations. His body needed it desperately. After eating, Owen felt stronger, clear-headed, ready to tackle the next challenge. He looked at the metal ore samples and the remains of his pod and saw possibility. Not just survival tools, a forge. The concept seemed insane at first, building a forge on a death world with limited resources and no backup plan. But the alternative was slowly dying as his equipment failed and his rations ran out. At least with a forge he could make new tools, repair old ones, create weapons better than a sharpened stick. He spent 2 days preparing. First, he needed a heat source hot enough to melt metal. The plasma cutter could do it, but using it meant burning through the remaining charge. Instead, Owen gathered combustible materials from the surface. Dead plant matter that burned hot and long. Some kind of resin that oozed from certain trees and ignited like gasoline. He tested everything carefully, noting what burned clean and what produced toxic smoke. Next came the forge structure itself. He found a chamber with heat-resistant rock walls and good ventilation through natural cracks. Using pieces of the pod and cave stones, he built a basic furnace. Nothing fancy, just a box that could contain heat and channel it where he needed it. He fashioned a crude bellows from his pressure suit's air bladder and some flexible tubing. The hardest part was the crucible. He needed something that could hold molten metal without melting itself. Owen searched the caves for hours before finding what he needed, a type of stone that the scanner identified as having an extremely high melting point. He shaped it using the plasma cutter's lowest setting, carving out a bowl-like depression. When everything was ready, Owen stood back and looked at his work. It was rough, primitive, but it might actually work. He started the fire using his precious resin and wood. The flames caught quickly, burning bright and hot. Owen worked the bellows, pumping air into the furnace. Heat built rapidly. Sweat ran down his face and back. The temperature in the chamber rose until it felt like standing inside an oven. He added the ore samples to the crucible and waited. Minutes passed. The rock glowed red, then orange, then white. The ore began to soften, melting into liquid metal that pooled at the bottom of the crucible. Owen watched in fascination. It was working. Against all odds and common sense, he was smelting metal in a cave on a planet that wanted him dead. The first pour was clumsy. He used makeshift tongs made from bent hull plating to lift the crucible and tip it into a mold he'd carved from soft stone. The metal flowed like glowing honey. It smoked and hissed where it touched the mold. Owen set the crucible down and waited for the metal to cool. When it was solid enough to handle, he pulled the casting free. A blade, crude and rough, but definitely a blade. It needed sharpening and a handle, but it was a start. Proof that he could make things here, that he wasn't limited to what he'd salvaged from the wreck. Owen spent the next week working the forge. He made better blades, an axe head, reinforcement plates for his boots and gloves. Each piece was an experiment. Each failure taught him something. The metal from this planet was strange, harder than earth steel but more brittle if not treated correctly. He learned to work it by trial and error, adjusting temperatures and cooling times. On the 9th day, something changed. Owen was working the forge, hammering a hot blade into shape, when he felt eyes on him. He spun around, weapon ready, expecting granite or something worse. Instead, he saw something else entirely. The creature was sleek where granite had been massive. It moved with liquid grace, 6 limbs carrying it across the cave floor in absolute silence. Its hide shifted colors, matching the stone around it until Owen could barely track its movement. When it stopped, yellow eyes studied him with unmistakable intelligence. This was a different kind of predator, a hunter built for stealth and precision. Owen's hand tightened on his hammer. The creature was maybe 20 feet away. Too close to run, too far to strike effectively. They stared at each other across the fire-lit chamber. The creature's head tilted slightly, almost like a question. Its gaze moved from Owen to the forge to the blade cooling on the stone anvil, then back to Owen. It made no move to attack. Just watched. Owen's mind raced. Granite had been territorial and aggressive. This creature was different. Curious, maybe? He made a slow, deliberate movement. Reached to the side where a piece of cooked meat sat cooling from his morning meal. The creature's eyes tracked his hand, but it didn't react aggressively. He tossed the meat. Not far, just halfway between them. The meat landed with a soft thud. The creature looked at the offering, looked at Owen, then moved forward with that same silent grace. It sniffed the meat, picked it up in jaws lined with razor teeth, and backed away. Still watching him, still evaluating. Then it vanished into the shadows so completely that Owen couldn't tell where it had gone. He stood there, breathing hard, hammer still raised, wondering what had just happened. The creature could have attacked, could have killed him before he even knew it was there, but it had chosen to observe instead, to take the offered food and leave peacefully. Owen lowered the hammer and returned to work. But his mind was elsewhere now. That creature was intelligent, more than intelligent. It had made a choice based on evaluation and strategy, rather than pure instinct, which meant it might come back, which meant he needed to be ready. For the next 3 days, Owen worked on his forge and watched the shadows. The creature appeared twice more, always at a distance, always watching. Each time Owen left food. Each time the creature took it and disappeared. On the third visit, it stayed longer, sat in the shadows and observed him hammering metal into tools. Owen started talking to it. Felt ridiculous at first, narrating his work to a predator that might eat him. But sound filled the silence and made the cave feel less lonely. He told it about the forge, about the metal's properties, about his plans to expand the workspace. The creature's eyes followed him, intelligent and alert. On the fourth day, everything changed. Owen was gathering materials on the surface when something went wrong. He'd been tracking a good source of the resinous wood when he'd failed to notice another creature stalking him from behind. This one was different from anything he'd seen before. All teeth and claws and segments like an insect, but sized like a bear. It had been hidden under what he'd thought was a rock formation. The thing charged with horrifying speed. Owen ran but knew he wouldn't make it to the cave entrance. His ribs still ached and slowed him down. The creature closed the distance in seconds. He could hear its breathing, smell its rotten breath, feel the heat from its body. Then something slammed into the predator from the side. A blur of motion and snarling fury. The sleek cave creature, the one that had been watching him, had attacked. It moved like water and lightning combined, striking at vulnerable points with surgical precision. The segmented predator thrashed and screamed. The two creatures rolled across the ground in a knot of violence. Owen didn't stop to watch. He sprinted for the cave entrance, dove inside, and grabbed his best spear. When he looked back, the fight was over. The segmented predator lay dead, its throat torn out. The cave creature sat nearby, licking a wound on one of its forelegs. Blood that looked too purple to be healthy stained the ground. They stared at each other across the distance. Owen made a decision. He approached slowly, hands visible, posture non-threatening. The creature tensed but didn't flee. When he was close enough, he pulled out his medical kit. The creature watched as he sprayed wound sealant on its injury. It hissed at the sting but didn't attack. Owen backed away and returned to the cave. The creature followed at a distance. That night it slept near the forge, drawn by the warmth. Owen named it Whisper because of how silently it moved. The name stuck because names had power. They turned threats into individuals, made survival feel less like endless warfare and more like building something new. The next morning, Whisper was still there. Owen offered food. Whisper took it. They worked in proximity, not quite together but not apart either. Days passed. The distance between them shrank. Owen fashioned a light chest plate from metal, designed not to restrict movement. Whisper sniffed it, tested it with her claws, then allowed him to strap it on. 2 weeks after Whisper's arrival, Owen expanded his workspace outside the cave. The forge had grown too large for the chamber. He needed more space, better ventilation, and access to larger ore deposits. With Whisper nearby, other predators avoided the area. It was safer than it had ever been. Owen built walls using stone and metal, created a proper smithy with multiple work areas. The forge fire burned day and night now, fed by materials he gathered with increasing confidence. Tools multiplied. His skill improved. What had started as desperate survival was becoming something else. Building, creating, living. Granite showed up one day, drawn by the forge's heat. Owen tensed, ready for confrontation. Whisper positioned herself between them, protective and alert. But Granite just stood there, massive and ancient, absorbing the warmth. Owen approached with fresh meat and a newly forged metal plate as offerings. Granite took them both. The massive creature settled near the forge and stayed. Days became routine. Granite came for warmth and food. Whisper hunted and watched over the territory. Owen worked metal and expanded his homestead. 3 months after crashing on a planet designed to kill him, Owen had carved out a space that felt almost safe. He stood at his forge one evening, both creatures nearby, and realized something profound. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. Building a life from nothing in a place the galaxy had written off as impossible. The distress beacon still blinked in the wreckage of his pod. But Owen barely thought about rescue anymore. This place was becoming home. These creatures were becoming companions. And the forge fire burned bright in the growing darkness. The sky burned purple when the twin suns set together, which happened every 6th day. Owen had learned to track time by the suns and the planet's strange rotation. 5 short days with one sun, 1 long day with both, then the cycle repeated. The purple sunsets meant the long day was ending, and the temperature would drop significantly overnight. He added more fuel to the forge fires and watched embers spiral up into the darkening sky. Granite lay near the largest fire pit, soaking in the heat like a massive stone come to life. The creature's armored hide reflected the flames, making patterns that shifted and danced. Whisper prowled the perimeter of their territory, nearly invisible in the growing darkness except for her eyes that caught and reflected every bit of available light. 4 months on Designation 7 had transformed Owen in ways he was still discovering. His hands were scarred and calloused from forge work. His body had adapted to the planet's harsh environment, no longer reacting to the mildly acidic rain or the strange spores that floated through the air. He moved differently too, with the careful efficiency of someone who understood that wasted energy could mean death. The homestead had grown beyond anything he'd imagined that first night in the cave. What started as a survival shelter was now a proper compound. Stone walls reinforced with metal protected the core living area. The forge complex had expanded to include 3 separate workstations for different types of metal work. He'd even created a functional water collection and filtration system, using principles he half remembered from basic training. Food was no longer a daily crisis. Owen had developed a sustainable system combining hunting, fungi cultivation in the deeper caves, and careful harvesting of certain surface plants that the scanner confirmed as edible. He'd learned which prey animals were worth the effort and which were too dangerous or too toxic. The cave rats, as he called them, bred fast and tasted decent. Larger prey existed but required planning, and often Whisper's helped to bring down safely. The partnership with Whisper had evolved into something remarkable. She understood commands now, not because he'd trained her like a pet, but because she'd chosen to learn. She'd observed him long enough to recognize patterns and meanings. When he needed to scout a new area, Whisper went ahead and returned with information, marking dangerous spots by leaving scored stone markers. When he hunted, she drove prey toward his ambush points. When he worked the forge, she guarded the perimeter. Granite was different. The massive creature operated on instinct and simple arrangements. Heat and food in exchange for presence. But that presence mattered. Other predators avoided the area when they detected Granite's scent. The armored beast had claimed this territory as his own, and Owen's compound sat at the center of that claim. Occasionally, Granite would help with heavy work, pushing large stones into place or holding metal pieces steady while Owen worked. Whether the creature understood what they were building or just enjoyed the warmth was unclear. Tonight felt different, though. Owen couldn't explain why. The air tasted metallic. The usual night sounds from the surrounding wilderness seemed subdued. Even Whisper sensed it, her movements more agitated than usual. She kept looking up at the sky, ears flattened against her head. Owen followed her gaze. The purple sunset was fading to deep blue, stars beginning to emerge. Then he saw it. A shape moving across the sky, massive even at a distance, wings that stretched impossibly wide, catching the last rays of sunlight and reflecting them in shades of red and gold. The creature circled high above, a silhouette against the stars. His stomach dropped. In 4 months, he'd encountered many of the planet's dangers. But flying predators had stayed away from this region, possibly because the terrain made aerial hunting difficult. This one was searching for something, or someone. The creature circled lower. Details became visible. It was enormous, easily the size of a small spacecraft. Its body was serpentine, covered in scales that looked metallic in the fading light. 4 wings beat with slow, powerful strokes. The head was wedge-shaped with a jaw that could swallow him whole. Whisper growled low, a sound Owen had never heard her make before. Granite rose to his feet, usually slow movements suddenly tense and ready. Even the massive armored beast recognized a serious threat when he saw one. The flying creature descended toward the forge fires. Owen realized his mistake too late. The fires burned bright every night, visible for miles, a beacon. He'd been so focused on the ground-level threats that he'd forgotten about what might hunt from above. The creature landed with earth-shaking impact 50 yards from the compound walls. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Those scales weren't just metallic in appearance, they looked like actual metal. Overlapping and articulated, steam rose from its nostrils. When it opened its mouth, Owen saw a glow deep in its throat like banked coals. It was drawn to the forge. Mistook the fires for competition or challenge. Owen understood immediately. This was a territorial response. The creature thought another of its kind had claimed this area. The beast roared. The sound was physical force shaking the ground and sending loose stones tumbling. It inhaled deeply, and Owen knew what was coming. He'd seen enough nature documentaries to recognize the signs. He dove behind the nearest wall just as superheated vapor erupted from the creature's mouth. The blast washed over the compound like liquid fire. Metal softened and warped. Stone cracked from thermal shock. The main forge structure collapsed in on itself. Weeks of work destroyed in seconds. Heat sucked the air from Owen's lungs. He pressed himself against the ground and prayed the wall would hold. When the blast ended, he looked up to see devastation. Half his compound was wrecked. The forges were destroyed. Supplies were scattered and burning. Months of progress gone in one attack. Whisper launched herself at the flying creature with a snarl of pure fury. She was fast, incredibly fast, but the creature was prepared. A wing swept out and batted her aside. She hit the ground hard and rolled. Owen saw her struggle to rise, one leg clearly injured. Rage replaced fear in his chest. This thing had destroyed his home and hurt Whisper. Granite charged. For all his size, the armored beast could move surprisingly fast when motivated. He slammed into the flying creature's side like a battering ram. The impact staggered the flyer, knocked it off balance. Granite pressed the advantage, using his bulk to push and shove, keeping the creature grounded where it was less dangerous. Owen grabbed what he could. A net he'd woven from salvaged cable. Metal hooks meant for hauling large ore chunks. A spear with a forge-heated tip, still glowing red from the work he'd been doing before the attack. Not much against a creature that size, but more than nothing. He ran toward the fight. Stupid, probably suicidal, but he was beyond caring. Whisper was hurt. His home was destroyed. This creature thought it could just take everything he'd built. The flying beast broke free from Granite's charge and spread its wings. It was preparing to take off, to gain altitude and attack from above where they couldn't reach it. Owen threw the net with everything he had. The weighted edges wrapped around one wing, tangling in the articulated scales. The creature stumbled, unable to achieve liftoff. Granite tackled it again, this time going for the neck. His massive jaws clamped down on scales that screeched like metal scraping metal. The flying creature thrashed, its tail whipping around and catching Granite in the side. The armored beast grunted but didn't let go. Owen saw his chance. The creature's other wing was extended, trying to maintain balance. He charged with the spear and drove it into the wing membrane, the forge-heated tip punching through. The creature screamed and pulled away, ripping the spear from Owen's hands. But the damage was done. The wing was compromised. It couldn't fly now, even if it broke free. The fight became a grinding battle of endurance. Granite kept the creature pinned down. Whisper, despite her injury, harried from the sides, striking at vulnerable joints and exposed flesh. Owen used what weapons he could grab, driving the creature back step by step. But then Owen saw something that changed everything. The creature's movements were becoming weaker. Not from their attacks. It was holding one wing at an odd angle, the one without the spear damage. When it moved, the creature flinched. An old injury, maybe. Something that had happened before it arrived here. Understanding hit Owen like a physical blow. This creature was hurt. That's why it had come down to the ground-level fires. It was drawn to the heat not just from territorial instinct, but because it needed warmth, needed healing. It had attacked not from aggression, but from fear and pain. Owen held up his hand and shouted, "Stop, wait." Granite didn't understand words, but he recognized Owen's tone. The massive beast backed off slightly, still ready to attack but no longer actively fighting. Whisper limped back to Owen's side, confused but trusting. The flying creature lay on the ground, breathing hard. Its eyes, now that Owen looked closely, showed pain rather than rage. The injured wing was clearly damaged, scales torn away and membranes shredded. An old wound, infected maybe. The creature couldn't hunt properly, couldn't maintain territory, was probably starving. Owen made a decision that was either brilliant or insane. He approached slowly, hands visible, posture submissive. The creature watched him, too tired to attack. When he got close to the damaged wing, the creature flinched but didn't strike. Owen pulled out his medical supplies. The wound was bad. Infected, definitely. The flesh around it was discolored and hot to the touch even through the scales. Owen had no idea if human medicine would work on this alien biology, but doing nothing meant the creature would die slowly. He sprayed the wound with disinfectant and sealant, the same stuff he'd used on Whisper months ago. The creature hissed at the sting but held still. Its eyes, huge and reptilian, studied Owen with that same intelligence he'd seen in Whisper and Granite. It was making calculations. weighing options, deciding whether to trust or attack. Owen backed away after treating the wing. He gestured to the least damaged forge pit, where coals still glowed hot. You need warmth? Fine. Stay, rest, heal. The creature watched him for a long moment. Then, moving carefully, it dragged itself toward the warm coals. It settled down with its damaged wing spread out, absorbing heat. The tension in its body eased slightly. Owen kept his distance and started assessing the damage to his compound. The destruction was extensive but not total. One forge was completely gone. The other two were damaged but repairable. His living quarters had survived mostly intact because they were behind the thickest walls. Supplies were scattered, but most were salvageable. He'd lost progress, but not everything. Whisper limped over and pressed against his leg. Owen checked her injury. Bruised badly, but nothing broken. She'd heal. Granite had taken hits too, but his armor had absorbed most of the damage. They'd all survive this. The flying creature remained by the coals, eyes half closed, finally able to rest. Owen looked at it and felt exhaustion replace anger. Another apex predator. Another impossible situation. Another choice to make about killing or coexisting. He was too tired to make decisions tonight. Tomorrow he'd figure out if this creature was a threat or a potential ally. Tonight he'd clean up the damage and make sure his companions were okay. The purple sunset had given way to full darkness. Stars covered the sky in patterns that still looked wrong to his earth-trained eyes. Owen started gathering scattered tools and supplies. Whisper helped despite her injury, carrying smaller items in her jaws. Granite positioned himself between the compound and the wilderness, on guard as always. The flying creature slept by the coals, finally getting the warmth and rest it desperately needed. 4 months ago, Owen had crashed on this planet expecting to die. Now he was rebuilding after an attack, tending to injured predators and considering whether to help the very creature that had destroyed his work. Life on Designation 7 made no sense by normal standards. But then again, normal standards didn't apply here. This was survival at its most basic. Finding ways to coexist with things that should kill you. Making allies out of nightmares. Owen looked at the wreckage of his forge and smiled despite the pain and exhaustion. He'd rebuilt once before. He'd rebuild again. That's what humans did. They adapted. They persisted. They made homes in places that should be impossible. Tomorrow he'd start repairs. Tomorrow he'd see if the flying creature could be trusted. Tomorrow he'd figure out what came next. Tonight he'd rest and let his body heal. Survival wasn't a single battle. It was a series of choices made over and over until living became normal. Sunlight the color of old brass cut through the morning mist like blades. Owen woke to find the flying creature still by the forge pit, exactly where it had collapsed the night before. Its breathing was steady now, no longer labored. The damaged wing lay spread out, catching the morning warmth. Up close in daylight, the scales really did look like worked metal, each one slightly different in color, ranging from deep red to bright gold. Owen named it Phoenix while watching those scales shimmer in the light. The name fit, something about fire and rising from destruction. His compound certainly looked destroyed enough in the morning light. Debris scattered everywhere, walls cracked and scorched, one forge completely demolished. But the bones of the place remained intact. He could work with that. First priority was checking on his companions. Whisper had claimed a spot in the cave entrance where she could watch both Phoenix and the surrounding territory. Her injured leg was held carefully off the ground, but she was alert and responsive. Owen examined the limb and found no breaks, just deep bruising. She'd need rest for a few days, but would recover fully. Granite had positioned himself between Phoenix and the main living quarters. The massive armored beast was doing what he always did, being an immovable obstacle. But his attention kept drifting back to Phoenix with what looked like curiosity, rather than aggression. Maybe Granite recognized another heat seeker, someone else who needed the forge fires to feel comfortable. Owen left food for all three creatures and started the day's work. The compound wouldn't repair itself, and he needed to get the forges operational again. Without them, he couldn't make tools or weapons or any of the dozens of items he relied on daily. He gathered salvageable materials and began sorting them into piles. Metal that could be reused here, stone for wall repairs there, completely destroyed stuff in another pile. Phoenix watched him work with eyes that tracked every movement. The creature's intelligence was obvious in the way it observed, how it studied the relationship between Owen and the other two predators. When Owen approached to check the wing injury, Phoenix tensed but allowed the examination. The wound looked better already. The disinfectant had worked, reducing the infection. The scales around the tear showed signs of new growth. "You'll fly again," Owen said, knowing Phoenix couldn't understand words but hoping tone would communicate intent.
"Just need time and rest." Phoenix rumbled deep in its chest, a sound that vibrated through the ground.
Not aggressive, more like acknowledgement. Owen took it as a good sign and went back to work. The day passed in physical labor that left no room for thinking. Owen lifted stones, hammered metal, rebuilt what had been broken. His body protested, muscles screaming from the previous night's fight and today's work. But stopping meant giving up, and he'd never been good at that. Sweat ran down his back despite the morning chill. His hands developed new blisters on top of old calluses. Whisper hobbled around the perimeter, doing what she could with 3 functional legs. She couldn't hunt effectively, but she could still watch and warn. Several times she alerted to movement in the distant wilderness, and each time Owen paused to assess threats, mostly smaller predators testing the boundaries. They saw Phoenix and retreated quickly. Word was spreading through the local ecosystem that this territory was claimed by something dangerous. Granite surprised Owen by helping with the heavy work. The armored beast would position himself next to large stones that needed moving, letting Owen use his bulk as leverage. It wasn't training or commands, just Granite figuring out that helping got the forge rebuilt faster, which meant heat sooner, self-interest that coincidentally aligned with Owen's goals, but Owen wasn't complaining. By midday, Phoenix began moving. Small movements at first, testing the damaged wing. The creature winced but continued the exercise, working through pain to prevent the wing from stiffening. Owen recognized the behavior. Phoenix was a survivor too, someone who understood that healing required pushing through discomfort. They had that in common. The second forge came back online by afternoon. Owen had prioritized it because this one had the best airflow and temperature control. Getting metal hot enough to work required precise conditions, and this forge delivered them. He started small, repairing damaged tools and making new wall brackets. The familiar rhythm of hammer on anvil was meditative, letting his mind wander while his hands worked. Phoenix dragged itself closer to watch. The creature's head tilted at different angles, studying the forge's construction and Owen's techniques. When Owen poured molten metal into a mold, Phoenix's eyes reflected the glowing liquid with obvious fascination. The creature made a sound, a sort of whistling chirp that seemed to indicate approval or interest. "You like the firework?" Owen asked. "Makes sense. You're probably from a volcanic region or somewhere super hot. This planet got those." Phoenix chirped again, a different tone this time. Owen had no idea what it meant, but having a conversation with a massive flying predator felt oddly normal. 4 months on Designation 7 had recalibrated his sense of normal into something most people would consider insane. Over the next several days, a routine established itself. Owen worked repairs during the daylight hours. Whisper rested and healed, her leg improving daily. Granite did whatever Granite did, which mostly involved sleeping near heat sources and occasionally helping move heavy objects. Phoenix exercised the damaged wing with increasing intensity, rebuilding strength and flexibility. The interesting part was watching the 3 apex predators figure each other out. Whisper and Granite had already established a working relationship based on mutual benefit and respect. Adding Phoenix to that mix created tension at first. Granite didn't like sharing forge heat. Whisper didn't trust something that could attack from above. Phoenix was wary of both of them, but proximity forced adaptation. They learned each other's boundaries. Granite got the primary forge pit because he'd been there first. Phoenix claimed the secondary pit where the damaged wing could absorb maximum heat. Whisper positioned herself where she could watch both of them and the perimeter simultaneously. Nobody fought because fighting cost energy they couldn't spare. Owen acted as the neutral zone. All 3 creatures had formed bonds with him first before encountering each other. He became the common ground, the reason they tolerated each other's presence. When Granite got too possessive of the forge space, Owen would redirect him with food. When Whisper got nervous about Phoenix's size, Owen would sit between them until she relaxed. When Phoenix showed signs of aggression, Owen would stand his ground and use tone to de-escalate. It was exhausting, like being a parent to 3 deadly children who could kill him without trying hard. But it worked because he treated them with respect rather than trying to dominate. They weren't pets or servants. They were partners in survival, each bringing something necessary to the arrangement. 10 days after Phoenix's arrival, the wing had healed enough for test flights. Owen watched as the creature spread both wings fully for the first time since the injury. The damaged wing still showed scarring, but the membranes had regenerated. Phoenix crouched, gathering strength, then launched itself upward. The first attempt was clumsy. Phoenix gained maybe 20 feet before landing hard, wing control not quite synchronized. But the creature tried again immediately, and again, and again. Each attempt was slightly better, slightly more controlled. By the end of the day, Phoenix was managing short flights around the compound perimeter. Owen felt an unexpected surge of pride watching it. This creature had arrived as a threat, destroyed his work, and could have killed him easily. Now it was healing, rebuilding strength, learning to fly again. They were both doing the same thing, really. Taking damage and getting back up, refusing to let setbacks be permanent. That night, with all three creatures resting around rebuilt forge fires, Owen took inventory of his situation. The compound was functional again, maybe not quite as advanced as before, but definitely livable. His food supplies were adequate. Water was plentiful. The forge produced tools and weapons as needed. He had 3 apex predators who'd chosen to stay, offering protection and occasional help in exchange for food and warmth. 6 months into his unplanned residency on Designation 7, Owen had accomplished something nobody thought possible. He'd survived a Class-9 Deathworld. More than survived, he'd thrived. Built infrastructure, created alliances, adapted to conditions that should have killed him dozens of times over. The distress beacon still transmitted weekly from the pod wreckage. Owen went to check on it sometimes, more from habit than hope. 6 months without rescue meant nobody was looking. His transport was listed as destroyed with all hands lost. The Federation had written him off. He was officially dead in their records. The thought should have bothered him more than it did. Should have made him angry or depressed. But standing in his compound with 3 impossible companions in a home he'd built from nothing, Owen just felt tired. Not defeated tired, accomplished tired. The kind of tired that came from a day of good work. Phoenix approached while he was lost in thought. The creature's head was now level with his chest when standing. Up close, Owen could see his reflection in those metallic scales. He looked different than 6 months ago, harder, more weathered. His hair was longer, tied back with salvaged cord. His skin was tanned and scarred from countless minor injuries. His clothes were patched and reinforced with metal plates. He looked like someone who belonged here, someone shaped by this world instead of crushed by it. Phoenix made that chirping sound again and lowered its massive head. The gesture was clear. An invitation or request? Owen reached out slowly and touched the scales between the creature's eyes. They were warm, almost hot, and smoother than they looked. Phoenix's eyes closed, accepting the contact. Trust. That's what this was. Phoenix trusted him. Whisper trusted him. Even Granite, in his own way, trusted him. They'd all chosen to stay when they could have left. Chosen to cooperate when fighting was their nature. Chosen to heal instead of staying broken. Owen patted Phoenix's head and stepped back. We're all damaged here, he said quietly. But we're fixing it together. Phoenix opened its eyes and spread its wings. The damaged one moved smoothly now, almost perfectly synchronized with the healthy wing. The creature launched itself into the evening sky, catching thermal currents and rising higher than it had managed since the injury. It circled the compound once, twice, 3 times. A victory lap. Proof that healing was possible even for the badly wounded. When Phoenix landed, Granite rumbled approval. Whisper chirped in her own way. Owen just smiled and added more fuel to the forges. Tomorrow he'd start the next project, whatever that turned out to be. Maybe reinforcing the walls, maybe expanding the metal working area, maybe building something entirely new. The point was there would be a tomorrow, and another one after that, and after that. Each day built on the previous one, creating something impossible one piece at a time. That's how you survived a death world. Not by conquering it, but by learning to live within it. By making allies instead of enemies. By building instead of taking. The stars came out, familiar now in their unfamiliarity. The twin suns had set separately tonight, leaving the sky dark and full of alien constellations. Somewhere out in the galaxy, humanity was doing whatever humanity did. Trading, exploring, arguing politics. They had no idea one of their own was here. Alive against all probability. Building a home with 3 apex predators as companions. Owen liked it that way. Let them think Class-9 Deathworlds were impossible. Let them believe some places couldn't be tamed. He knew different. Knew that impossible was just a challenge waiting for someone stubborn enough to ignore it. He settled down to sleep near the forge fires, Whisper on one side and Granite on the other. Phoenix perched on the newly reinforced wall structure, wings folded keeping watch from above. 4 survivors from different species, brought together by circumstances and sustained by mutual need. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be threats and setbacks and problems to solve. But tonight they were safe. Tonight they had warmth and food and shelter. Tonight they had each other. And that was enough. The shimmer of distant engines caught Owen's attention during his morning check of the perimeter. He'd learned to recognize atmospheric distortion patterns, the way air bent around objects moving at high speed. This distortion was massive and coming closer. A ship, an actual ship. His heart hammered against his ribs. 6 months of silence, and now someone was finally responding to the distress beacon. Part of him felt relief. Another part, the part that had grown comfortable in this strange new life, felt something closer to dread. He watched the ship descend, its hull reflecting the morning sun. The design was Federation standard, a survey vessel built for short-range exploration and rescue operations. Whisper sensed his tension and moved closer, pressing against his leg. Phoenix spread wings from his perch on the wall, ready to take flight if needed. Granite simply watched, massive and patient as always. Owen realized his companions were preparing for a threat response. They'd learned to read his emotions and react accordingly. "It's okay," he said, not sure if he was reassuring them or himself. Probably. The ship touched down about 200 yards from the compound, close enough to be accessible but far enough to maintain safety distance. Smart approach for a Class 9 landing. The hull bore Federation markings and the insignia of a Centaurian command crew. A hatch opened and figures emerged, moving with the careful precision of people expecting danger. There were 5 of them, all in full environmental suits with weapons visible but not drawn. The lead figure had the bearing of someone in charge, moving with purpose while the others flanked in protective formation. They spotted Owen standing near his compound and stopped abruptly. Through their helmet visors, he could see expressions of shock. Owen waved. The gesture felt absurdly casual given the circumstances. "Took you long enough," he called out. His voice was rougher than he remembered, like he'd forgotten how to speak properly after months of mostly talking to creatures that didn't understand words. The lead figure approached slowly while the others maintained defensive positions. When she got close enough, she raised her helmet visor. The face underneath was Centaurian, with the characteristic blue-tinted skin and large dark eyes. Her expression cycled rapidly between disbelief, confusion, and something that might have been awe. "You're alive," she said. Her voice carried the melodic quality typical of her species. "The transport Meridian crashed here 6 months ago. All crew and passengers were listed as casualties. You're showing as human designation Owen Park in our records. How are you alive?" "Built a shelter, found food, made some friends." Owen gestured back toward the compound where 3 apex predators watched with varying degrees of interest. The usual survival stuff. The Centaurian's eyes went wide. "Those are Class A apex predators. 3 of them. You're standing between us and them without any visible restraints or containment fields." "Yeah, they live here. We have an arrangement." One of the other crew members, some species Owen didn't recognize, raised what looked like a scanning device. "Commander Rella, the life signs are confirmed. 1 human, 3 massive predatory creatures. No signs of distress from the human. Vital signs are actually remarkably healthy. This makes no sense according to any xenobiology I know." Commander Rella turned back to Owen. "We need to evacuate you immediately. This planet is classified as uninhabitable. Our protocol requires emergency extraction of any survivors with minimal ground time. Please gather whatever essential supplies you can carry in the next 10 minutes. I'm not leaving." The words came out flat and certain. Commander Rella blinked, clearly not expecting that response. "I'm sorry, what?" "I said I'm not leaving. This is my home. I built it. These creatures chose to stay with me. I have food, water, shelter, everything I need. Why would I leave?" "Because this is a Class 9 Deathworld," Rella said, speaking slowly like she was explaining something to a child. "The atmospheric conditions alone should have killed you within days. The predator density makes long-term survival mathematically impossible. The toxic plant life, the acidic precipitation, the extreme temperature fluctuations. This planet is designed to kill anything that lands on it." Owen shrugged. "Adapted. You learn what's actually dangerous versus what's just uncomfortable. The rain isn't that bad if you have proper shelter. The predators mostly avoid this area now. Food is manageable once you know what to look for. Temperature is why I built the forges. Forges, Rella repeated. You built forges? On a death world. Using what materials? Local ore, salvaged materials from my crash pod, some creative engineering. Come on, I'll show you. He turned and walked back toward the compound. Behind him, he heard the rescue team arguing in urgent whispers about protocol and safety. Then footsteps as they followed. Curiosity apparently winning over caution. Owen smiled. Curiosity was universal, it seemed. Granite rumbled when the strangers approached, a warning sound that vibrated through the ground. Owen placed a hand on the massive creature's armored hide. Easy, they're not threats. Just visitors. Phoenix dropped from the wall and landed with an impact that made the rescue team freeze. The creature's wingspan blocked the sun, casting them all in shadow. Whisper emerged from the compound interior, moving with liquid grace despite her slight limp from the old injury. The three apex predators formed a loose semicircle around the visitors, not aggressive but definitely protective. By all the stars, one of the crew members whispered. They're guarding him, actively guarding a human. Rella looked between Owen and the creatures with an expression that suggested her understanding of xenobiology was being fundamentally challenged. How did you accomplish this? These species don't form pack bonds across genetic lines. They're territorial solitary hunters according to every scan we have. You can't scan for trust, Owen said, or mutual benefit, or just spending time together until you stop being threats to each other. They stayed because staying was better than leaving. I helped when they were hurt. They helped when I was in danger. We built something that works. He led them through the compound, showing them the forges, the water system, the food storage, the living quarters. The rescue team documented everything, their scanning devices working overtime. Rella kept shaking her head like she was trying to wake up from a dream. This is impossible, she muttered. The Federation Council will never believe this without full documentation. So document it. I don't mind. But I'm still not leaving. Oh, and be reasonable. You've accomplished something remarkable here, truly. But what happens when you get sick? When your equipment finally fails? When a predator shows up that these three can't handle? You're one human on a hostile planet with no backup and no real medical support. I've been one human on a hostile planet for 6 months, Owen pointed out. Worked out so far. One of the crew members, a cautious-looking being with tentacles instead of arms, spoke up. Commander, the Homestead structure is actually quite sophisticated. The forge work shows advanced metalworking knowledge. The water filtration system is crude but effective. The defensive positions are well designed. This isn't random survival. This is deliberate construction and planning. Rella studied Owen with new intensity. You're not planning to leave, are you? Even if we ordered it, even if we used emergency protocols, you'd find a way back here. This is home. I built it. These creatures trust me. You don't abandon that just because it's difficult or weird by Federation standards. The Federation will want to study this, send researchers, xenobiologists, behavioral specialists. They'll turn this place into a research station. Only if I allow it, Owen said firmly, and I'll allow small-scale observation. A few people, minimal equipment, no permanent structures except what I approve. This stays a homestead, not a laboratory. The creatures here chose this arrangement. I won't betray that by letting your people treat them like specimens. Rella looked like she wanted to argue but couldn't find solid ground. Owen had survived 6 months on a planet that killed trained teams in days, had formed working relationships with apex predators that should have been impossible, had built infrastructure that shouldn't exist according to any current xenobiology. He held all the cards here and they both knew it. I need to report this to Federation Command, Rella said finally. They'll want to send a delegation. Evaluate the situation directly. Make decisions about classification changes and research protocols. Fine, send whoever. But they follow my rules here. This is my territory. Mine and theirs. Owen gestured to the three creatures who watched the conversation with obvious interest. We don't need rescuing. We don't need fixing. We need to be left alone to live how we choose. Phoenix suddenly spread his wings and launched skyward. The rescue team scattered, expecting an attack. But Phoenix just circled overhead, riding thermal currents with obvious joy. The damaged wing moved perfectly now, completely healed. He called out, A sound that echoed across the compound and into the wilderness beyond, an announcement of territory and presence. Granite moved to the primary forge and settled down, soaking in residual heat. Whisper positioned herself at the compound entrance, on guard as always. They'd gone back to routine, dismissing the visitors as non-threatening. The rescue team watched in fascination. "They're so comfortable here," Rella said quietly. "So adapted to coexisting. Do you understand how unprecedented this is? Cross-species cooperation on this level doesn't happen naturally. It requires generations of coevolution or intensive training. Or it just requires being in a situation where cooperation is better than competition," Owen said. "We needed each other, so we figured it out. Not everything needs to be complicated." The rest of the day passed in a blur of documentation and questions. The rescue team recorded everything, scanning equipment working constantly. They asked about his methods, his daily routine, his interactions with the creatures. Owen answered honestly, though he suspected they wouldn't really understand until they'd lived it themselves. As evening approached and the twin suns began their descent, Rella approached him one last time. "We'll leave tonight and report back. Expect a delegation within 2 weeks, probably including military observers, xenobiologists, and a Federation diplomatic team. They'll want to understand how you did this before declaring it an anomaly or expanding it into something bigger. Tell them I'm not a test subject. Neither are my companions. If they want to visit, they're guests. If they want to study, they do it respectfully or not at all." Rella nodded slowly. "I'll convey that. Though I suspect the Federation will see this as a potential revolution in cross-species relations. If humans can form bonds with Class A predators on Deathworlds, it changes everything we thought we knew about habitability and colonization. Maybe it just means humans are more adaptable than your classifications account for." "Maybe," Rella agreed. She looked around the compound one more time, taking in the forges, the creatures, the impossible homestead built on a planet designed to kill. "For what it's worth, what you've done here is remarkable. Insane but remarkable. Most Federation citizens wouldn't last a day in these conditions. You've built a life. That's all anyone really wants," Owen said. "A place to call home. Some companions you can trust. Work that means something. The location doesn't matter as much as what you build there." The rescue team departed as the purple sunset painted the sky. Their ship rose on pillars of thrust, engines glowing against the darkening sky. Owen watched until they were out of sight, then turned back to his compound. Whisper was waiting for him at the entrance. Granite rumbled a greeting from the forge. Phoenix descended from his patrol circuit and landed on the wall with practiced ease. "Well," Owen said to them, "looks like we're about to have visitors." "Hope you're ready for that," Whisper chirped. Granite rumbled. Phoenix spread his wings briefly before folding them again. Ready or not, they'd face whatever came together. That was the arrangement. That was the bond they'd built. Owen added fuel to the forges and settled in for the evening. Tomorrow he'd need to prepare for the delegation's arrival. Maybe expand the living quarters to accommodate observers. Maybe establish clear boundaries for where visitors could and couldn't go. Maybe build some kind of meeting area that wouldn't make his companions nervous. But those were problems for tomorrow. Tonight he had warmth and food and companions who'd chosen to stay. Tonight he had a home that he'd built from nothing on a planet the galaxy said was impossible. Tonight he had proof that sometimes the experts were wrong, and the survivors wrote their own rules. The stars emerged one by one, bright and alien against the dark sky. Phoenix called out again, claiming territory and announcing presence. The sound carried across the wilderness a challenge and a declaration both. Other predators in the distance heard and stayed away, recognizing the message. This place was claimed. This place was protected. This place was home. And nothing in the galaxy was going to change that. 2 weeks turned out to be 9 days. The Federation delegation arrived early, possibly hoping to catch Owen unprepared or find evidence that contradicted Commander Rella's initial report. Instead, they found him expanding the compound walls while Phoenix flew overhead carrying large stones, and Granite pushed foundation pillars into place. Whisper watched from her usual guard position, tracking the incoming ship with focused attention. The ship that descended was larger than the rescue vessel, built for extended deployments and carrying at least 20 people based on its size. It landed in the same clearing Rella's team had used, and disgorged a mix of species that represented most of the Federation's major powers. Centaurians, definitely. Some tall insectoid beings, A few squat, heavily armored types that looked like they could survive anything, and 3 humans. Owen hadn't seen other humans in 6 months. The sight hit harder than expected, bringing up emotions he'd carefully buried under the daily work of survival. But these humans looked soft compared to what he'd become. Clean uniforms, unscarred skin, the slightly nervous movements of people unused to real danger. They belonged to the Federation's comfortable core worlds, not to places like this. The delegation's leader was one of the insectoid beings, its carapace covered in formal insignia that probably meant something important. It approached with a translator device held forward. "I am Delegate Zikris of the Federation Science Council. We are here to evaluate the situation on Designation 7 and determine appropriate classification changes and research protocols. Owen Park. I built this place. These are my companions." He gestured to the 3 creatures who'd moved into protective formation without being asked. "You're welcome to observe and ask questions. But understand this is our home, not your research site. You follow the rules or you leave." Zikris's translator took a moment to process that. When it spoke again, the artificial voice carried notes of surprise. "You claim territorial authority over a Class-9 Deathworld? I claim authority over my homestead and the land my companions have declared as territory. The rest of the planet can classify however you want. But here, my rules. I claim authority over my homestead and the land my companions have declared as territory. The rest of the planet can classify however you want. But here, my rules." One of the human delegates stepped forward. She had the look of an academic, someone more comfortable with data than fieldwork. "I'm Dr. Reeves, xenobiological specialist. Can you explain how you've achieved this level of cooperation with 3 apex predators? Our models suggest it should be impossible without intensive genetic modification or behavioral conditioning. They were hurt or hungry or both when we first met. I helped instead of attacking. They returned the favor. We kept helping each other until it became normal. Not complicated." "But the biological barriers alone," Dr. Reeves protested. "These species don't form social bonds with aliens. Their brain chemistry doesn't support it." Phoenix chose that moment to land directly next to Owen, close enough that his wing brushed against Owen's shoulder. The creature lowered his head and made the chirping sound that Owen had learned meant contentment. Owen reached up and scratched behind the metallic scales. "Maybe your models are wrong," Owen said simply. "Maybe intelligence is more flexible than you give it credit for." The delegation spent the day examining everything. They documented the forge operations, the water systems, the food storage, the defensive structures. They took biological samples from all 3 creatures with Owen's permission and grudging cooperation from the predators themselves. They recorded hours of video showing the daily routines and interactions. What fascinated them most was watching Owen work alongside his companions. Whisper would alert to potential threats on the perimeter. Granite would help position heavy materials for construction. Phoenix would fly aerial reconnaissance and return with information about terrain changes or approaching weather. It was coordinated cooperation without verbal communication, built on months of shared experience and mutual understanding. "This is revolutionary," one of the Centaurian scientists kept repeating. "If humans can form working relationships with apex predators in extreme environments, it opens possibilities we never considered. Colony sites we dismissed as too hostile might actually be viable with proper adaptation strategies." "It's not a strategy," Owen corrected. "It's just living. Paying attention to what actually works instead of what your models say should work. Being flexible instead of rigid. Treating intelligent beings with respect regardless of their biology." The delegation wanted to establish a permanent research outpost. Owen refused immediately. "You can send small teams for observation periods. No more than 5 people at a time. No permanent structures except what I approve. No weapons except basic defensive tools, and you share any data you collect. I want to know what you learn about making this work." Zikris tried to negotiate for more access, more people, more control. Owen stood firm. This was his home and his rules. The Federation could accept that or leave. After several hours of back and forth, they agreed to his terms. A rotating team of 5 observers, 2-week rotations, minimal equipment, all research shared freely. "There's one more thing," Zikris said as negotiations concluded. "Several humans have volunteered to join you here. They want to attempt similar arrangements, build their own homesteads on Designation 7. Would you be willing to advise them?" Owen considered that. Other humans trying to do what he'd done. They'd need help, definitely. The learning curve here was steep and mistakes were often fatal. But if they were serious about adapting rather than conquering, about building rather than extracting, maybe it could work. Send them in small groups. I'll teach them what I know. But they need to understand this isn't some adventure vacation. People die here if they're not careful and respectful. The planet doesn't care about their Federation credentials or their survival training. It only responds to actual adaptation. 3 days later, the first group arrived. 4 humans. All volunteers from colony worlds who'd grown up in harsh conditions. They looked capable and appropriately cautious, which was a good start. Owen gathered them in the compound's main area, while his 3 companions observed from positions around the perimeter. First rule, Owen began. Everything here can kill you. Plants, animals, weather, water if you're not careful. Respect that. Fear it enough to be cautious, but don't let fear paralyze you. You can live here, but only if you learn to read the environment. He spent the next week teaching them basics. How to identify safe food sources. Where to find clean water. How to build shelter that would withstand the planet's weather extremes. How to recognize predator signs and avoid unnecessary confrontations. Most importantly, how to think like someone who belonged here instead of someone just visiting. The volunteers were quick learners. 2 of them had engineering backgrounds and immediately grasped the forge work. One was a biologist who started cataloging the local ecosystem with genuine fascination, rather than fear. The 4th had survival training from a military background and picked up the hunting techniques quickly. On the 8th day, one of them encountered a predator, not one of the massive apex types, but dangerous enough. A pack hunter, built low to the ground with venomous spines and too many legs. It had cornered the engineer away from the compound. Owen heard the shouts and ran with Whisper. They found the engineer backed against a rock face, the predator circling and looking for an opening. Owen didn't have time for his usual careful approach. He charged in with a spear, drawing the predator's attention. Whisper hit it from the side, her jaws closing on what passed for a neck. The predator thrashed once, then went still. The engineer was shaking but unharmed. I didn't see it until too late. It was camouflaged, looked just like the rocks. That's how they hunt, Owen said. You got lucky Whisper and I were close. Next time you might not be. Stay alert. Always assume something is watching you because it probably is. That night, the engineer asked if she could stay permanently, not as an observer or researcher, as a colonist. I want to build my own homestead here, learn to live like you do. The other 3 volunteers made the same request over the next few days. They'd come expecting an extreme survival challenge and found something else entirely. Purpose. The chance to build something meaningful in a place everyone else had written off. The opportunity to prove that humans could adapt to anything if they tried hard enough. Owen agreed on conditions. They'd build their homesteads within a day's travel of his compound. Close enough for mutual support but far enough for independence. They'd share resources and knowledge. Most importantly, they'd approach any predators they encountered with the same respect he'd shown his 3 companions. 6 months later, Designation 7 had 5 human homesteads scattered across the region, 12 humans total, each learning to live with the planet's harsh conditions. Several had formed bonds with local predators, though none as dramatic as Owen's trio. The homesteads traded goods and supported each other during difficult times. They'd become a community, small but functional. The Federation eventually redesignated the planet. No longer Class-9 uninhabitable. Now Class-9 human settlement active. The change sparked debates across the galaxy. Some species saw it as proof that humans were dangerously adaptable, able to claim territory anywhere regardless of conditions. Others saw it as inspiration, evidence that intelligence and flexibility could overcome apparently impossible odds. Research teams rotated through regularly now, documenting everything. The data they collected was changing Federation policy on habitability and colonization. Dozens of planets previously marked as too hostile were being reevaluated. If humans could thrive on Designation 7, maybe other species could adapt to different extremes given the right approach. Owen stood at his forge one evening, watching the settlement grow in the distance. Lights from the other homesteads dotted the landscape like artificial stars. Phoenix perched on the wall, wings spread to catch the last rays of the setting suns. Granite dozed by the primary forge pit, content in the warmth. Whisper prowled the perimeter, older now but still sharp and attentive. Commander Rella visited occasionally, bringing supplies and news from the Federation. She'd become something like a friend, one of the few outsiders who truly understood what they'd built here. Tonight she sat with Owen while he worked a piece of metal into a new tool design. "You've started something remarkable," Rella said. "There are humans petitioning to come here every week. We have to turn most of them away, because we don't have resources to support a larger population yet. You've made this place desirable when it used to be a warning story." "Didn't mean to start a movement," Owen said, concentrating on his hammering. "Just wanted to survive." "But you did more than survive. You thrived. You proved that home isn't about where you are. It's about what you build there. That's powerful. That's hope." Owen finished the piece and set it aside to cool. He looked around his compound at his companions, at the distant homesteads, at the stars emerging in the alien sky. A year ago he'd crashed here expecting to die within days. Now he had a home, friends across species lines, and a community that was proving the galaxy's assumptions wrong. Owen finished the piece and set it aside to cool. He looked around his compound, at his companions, at the distant homesteads, at the stars emerging in the alien sky. A year ago he'd crashed here expecting to die within days. Now he had a home, friends across species lines, and a community that was proving the galaxy's assumptions wrong. "The Federation still thinks this is some kind of fluke," Owen said. "That humans are uniquely suited to deathworlds or something. They're missing the point." "What is the point?" Rella asked. "That intelligence means adaptation. Any species could do what we did here if they were willing to let go of their preconceptions and work with the environment instead of against it. Humans aren't special. We're just stubborn enough to try things other species have already declared impossible." Phoenix called out from his perch, a sound that carried across the settlement. The other homesteads answered, their own companion creatures adding voices to the chorus. Different species, different sounds, but all declaring the same thing. Territory claimed, presence established, home defended. Rella listened to the calls and smiled. "You know what the Federation Council is calling this place now? Not Designation 7, they're calling it Hope Station. Because if humans can make this work, maybe nothing is truly impossible." "Hope Station," Owen repeated, testing the words. "Better than Class-9 Deathworld drop zone, I guess." They sat in comfortable silence while the stars wheeled overhead. The forge fires burned steady and warm. The three companions maintained their usual positions, alert but relaxed. In the distance, lights from other homesteads glowed against the darkness. Music reached them on the wind, someone playing an instrument, the sound carrying hope and defiance in equal measure. This was home now. Not because it was easy or safe or comfortable, but because they'd made it so through determination and adaptation and refusing to accept that some places couldn't be lived in. The galaxy had called it impossible. They'd proven it wrong one day at a time, one alliance at a time, one homestead at a time. Owen stood and stretched, feeling the familiar ache of a long day's work. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, always did, but tomorrow would also bring another sunrise, another chance to build, another opportunity to prove that humans belonged here, just as much as any species belonged anywhere. Whisper approached and pressed against his leg. Granite rumbled contentment from the forge. Phoenix spread his wings briefly, catching starlight on metallic scales. 3 apex predators who'd chosen to stay with a human who'd refused to die. 4 survivors who'd built something impossible and made it look easy. "Come on," Owen said to his companions. "Let's get some rest. Big day tomorrow. The new group of volunteers arrives and someone needs to teach them how not to get eaten in the first week." They moved together toward the living quarters. A strange pact bound by trust and mutual benefit and months of shared struggle. The Federation would document it and study it and try to replicate it. But some things couldn't be replicated. Some things only happened when survival forced innovation and desperation bred creativity, and stubbornness met intelligence. The forge fires burned through the night, beacons in the darkness. Around them, a community grew slowly but surely, proving that home was wherever you were determined enough to build it. The galaxy watched and learned, and on a planet once written off as a death trap, life flourished in forms nobody had imagined possible. Owen closed his eyes and slept peacefully. 3 predators standing guard, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would come and they'd face it together. That was enough. That was everything. That was home.